With that,
I'm going to record this and I'll record it in the cloud, and that way, if we want to share some information later, we can.
Okay.
Well, because did you explain we are an online club?
Okay.
So we just meet online. So many of our programs, our members can come back to and see what we're trying to talk about and trying to introduce. So
We have members from 8 different states and 7 different countries.
Oh, great.
The majority of our members are from Northeast Ohio.
Okay. Yeah, it's a pretty active area.
Sorry, I always mess it up. Northwest Ohio. So, yeah.
So northeast, and a little bit northwest is a pretty active pollinator activist area.
good to know.
Yeah, I get lots of inquiries from northwest, very northwest, not west, north and northeast Ohio for things, especially northeast Ohio.
well, I recently joined the Wild Ones of Northeast Ohio,
Okay.
which is kind of just a startup at this point.
Youngstown group.
This is Northeast Ohio, so she's the president is in Lodi,
Okay,
which
great.
is, you know where that is,
Yep.
Medina County.
Yeah. Sure do.
Yeah, so we're, we want to get plants on the ground is kind of
Sure.
what the Wild Ones is about.
Yeah.
Getting plants in the ground, and any way we can do that. And then with Rotary, we're kind of looking for a vision for what we can either do as individuals on our own, or perhaps as collectively with those that are interested in pursuing something a little more than just our own backyard.
Go ahead.
Marci, could you explain for the audience what your position is and what you do?
I serve as the director of the Ohio Pollinator Habitat Initiative. I also work for ODOT as the District 6 District Environmental Coordinator. And essentially what we do through OPHI is we can provide technical assistance, or we can also provide grant assistance. It just really depends on what the aim is of who we're working with. We can provide plans, restoration plans. We can come out and do site visits. We can provide management plans. We can work with groups if they need, certain supplies or seed, or, it's kind of like, what do you need? What's your aim? What's your project? Do you have a project? Are you doing an outreach project? Do you need help with materials? Do you need us to put together a PowerPoint for you? Kind of whatever you need. And it's usually a two-way street. It's not usually us giving and somebody taking. It's usually, hey, you're reaching out to us because you want to do something good for pollinators or monarchs or what have you, or grassland birds. And we say, okay, those all meet our mission. So what can we do to help us spread the word? And is that us providing with materials, or are you doing a restoration project? And if you make, for example, I have a grant right now with the Monarch Joint Venture. And if you make the project monarch specific, whereas like flagship, although if you're helping monarchs, you're helping other species. If you're willing to put up signage for Monarch Joint Venture, we can help, provide you seed and materials through that grant. So things like that, different things like that. We do a lot. I'd say probably like 70% of what we do is technical assistance, which we just, go do a site visit, provide our comments, our recommendations, what we would do for prep, for seeding, for management, different things like that, and provide those to people free of charge because we're a nonprofit. Okay. And we accept donations for our visits. I go out and do speaking, engagements. People give me donations for coming out and do a speaking engagement. We don't require it. It's just something that's nice. And all of that money goes back into restoration and outreach materials.
Okay, very good.
And then when you see all the orange cones out on the road, about 90% of those projects have an environmental document tied to it.
Ah.
Okay,
Oh.
that's good to know, I think.
Yeah. So ODOT's doing their part, making sure that under NEPA, that we are double checking all of our impacts to minimize those to the greatest extent possible whenever we have a roadway project. And that can be anything from paving to a bridge replacement.
And then sometimes that means mitigation projects if highways impact sensitive habitats.
Correct. Or what we do, if we see a project, if we have a really big project and we know that there's some very sensitive resources that might be impacted, our job as environmental specialists is to work with our planning team to minimize those impacts even before we get to a construction project. So we work with them to say, well, these areas are super sensitive. Where can we deviate the plan a little bit to lower the impacts, to lower issues, or potentially not impact this at all? Can we skew this to the left? Can we skew it to the right? Can we move this over? Can we, change the footprint in some way, shape, or form that eliminates the impacts or brings it down to a level that we don't have to mitigate? All we're doing is going out and doing like a relocation or doing a little tree planting or, doing what we can to minimize as much as we can before we even get to construction.
Okay. So as a Rotary Club that meets online, normally you have, there's 25,000 Rotary clubs throughout the world, of which most of them meet in a small town, and they are all centered and they'll do a project for that town. When we were looking for what is a project that we could do online, it didn't matter where we lived, what could we do? So we looked at the Pollinator project, and I guess that's why we're looking for some guidance from you, that you might say some ideas that we could do individually based on where we live.
I think that, since you have members from different states and different countries and things like that, and you're all part of the same group, what I would potentially do is start off with where one person lives, do a project there. And now I will tell you, if you're doing a restoration project, those can take 2 to 3 years to actually get done. Okay. And like done, meaning in a position where now all you're doing is managing it. Okay. Where you're just keeping the unwanted things away and letting the things you want to see grow. As an online Rotary group, you guys are so spread out. What could be probably manageable is if, online, if you did some sort of fundraising online for your group and then work with a nonprofit like me to do some match on your fundraising, and then pick somebody's state. We could pick Ohio, and then whose town? Marietta, okay, Marietta, Ohio, and say, we're going to do our first project here, and pick at how many acres, an acre, 2 acres, whatever, and say, we're going to do our first project here. We're going to take that those fundraising and that match. We're going to put it into materials for that restoration, and then start doing these projects that are scattered to meet all of your Rotary members' locales, if you will. And what's nice about that is, if you think about habitat as a patchwork, a mosaic of stopover habitat, that's how you're replacing it. You're replacing it as a mosaic of stopover habitat. And stopover habitat is vitally important because, for example, monarch butterflies migrate. There's 4 generations. So there's a lot of ground that they cover, which would be an attractive project for you guys because you're over 8 different states. And theoretically, monarchs are going to touch potentially all 8 of those states. So you can start working on a mosaic migration habitat for migrating monarchs and let that be like kind of your overarching project. It would take a long time, but that's what a big project is. So over time, your goal is to start maybe here. I know you have, members in other countries, but maybe start in the United States and say, our goal is to create at least 1 2-acre stopover habitat for monarchs in 8 states by 2030. You know, that's a pretty manageable goal considering it's 2022 now.
Mhm.
And each one, if you assume 2 years, you have, you know, you work on each one for 2 years. I think that that sounds manageable.
So you're talking about patchwork. So would it be wise for us to take where our members are and sort of plot on a map
Yep.
so that we know where the pathway might go?
Yeah, so there's migration maps online that will show you monarch migration. And all you really need to do is pull up that map and then figure out where the 8 states are in that migration path and pick one in each state along within that area, the general area, okay? And then you can, once you get your one in each state, okay? So if we say you're going to do a 2-acre restoration in each state, 2 times 8, 16. That's 16 acres over 8 states. Then you can do it again. Now we're going to do 2 more acres in each state. That's 16 more acres, right? And so over time, you're creating these bigger patchworks throughout the 8 states that your members belong to. And what would be nice is, you know, while you want to tie it to where your member is so then you can have some boots on the ground in that state to visit the site.
Right.
And then that member can work with whomever their local, you know, group is, wherever you decide you want to, wherever you think would be a good place to do it. Maybe it's a park, maybe it's, you know, a city area that's barren that they would want a green space. And then that member of your group would be responsible for being the contact boots on ground for that spot. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
So if we started with something, you know, right here in Lorraine County, then, you know, if we document what we're doing, how we get things off the ground and how we get things accomplished, we can really form a kind of a model or a template and say, well, this is, you know, this is what you gotta bite off here. You know, if you're gonna take this on, it's gonna take several steps and a couple of years. And
Correct.
to you know, bring it down to earth from concept to reality and say, here's how you get a couple acres of habitat, starting with a lawn in a park somewhere.
Right. Yep. In lawns, a lawn in a park is music to my ears. That's the easiest restoration project you can do. And we've dealt with some doozies, you know. So if you choose all lawn type areas that don't have invasive, we're not dealing with teasels, we're not dealing with thistles, we're not dealing with hemlock. All we're doing is dealing with grass to start with. Man, that's a heck of a lot easier to deal with.
Compared to, you mean an area that has shrubs and lots of invasive species, that type of thing? You mean?
Yeah, if we'd want to stay away from areas that already are chock full of invasive species and things like that, because the prep time takes about 2 years for those areas, as opposed to your lawn will take, you know, I mean, you can start and now then there's the whole question of what's your comfortability with prepping it? How are you okay with prepping it? There's different people with different comfortability levels on how to prep. Some people are not okay with chemicals. There is a place for chemicals, okay? It's a tool. We have lots of tools in our toolbox. Some people are not okay with that. Some people would prefer to do solarization. There's that tool too. Some people, if the plot's small enough, they get a team of people out there, or they rent some equipment and they rip off the top layer of the sod, just the top layer of vegetation down to bare earth. That's a very fast way of doing it. You know, so there's lots of different ways to do prep. And lawns, the reason why lawns are great is because any one of those tools can be used very efficiently for a lawn, because we're not dealing with invasive species. If I had a plot that was full of invasive species, I would probably not have a lot of tools. The only tool I'd probably have is chemicals, because once you're at a point where the plot is being taken over by invasive species, it's predominantly invasive, I have to use chemicals because they're going to win every time if I don't. You know? So being strategic about what your comfortability level is with prep is everything in regard to where you choose to have the project. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Mhm.
And you're talking about 2-acre plots. Do these acres have to be all in one, or can they be a small one here, a small one here, a small one here?
You can
Like
certainly
close.
do it. You can certainly do it that way. It's a little bit more time consuming in regard to prepping and what your comfortability level is. So let's say you're like, we're not okay with chemicals. We can't rent any equipment. We're going to have to do solarization. So that means if you break your acres up, and it doesn't have to be 2 acres. I just threw a number out there. Okay. It could be an acre, whatever. You know, you
Okay,
can start off even with a half an acre, whatever. You know, it's better than nothing. You're doing something, and something's better than nothing. Okay.
okay,
But let's say we are dealing with 2 acres and you want to break it up into 4 sections. That's 4 areas that you have to solarize individually, as opposed to one large area that you're solarizing. Does that make sense?
mhm,
Can I ask you what
So
solarizing means? Sorry.
What's that?
What does solarizing mean? Sorry.
Solarizing basically means you're taking, you have an area that you cut the grass, you water that, like you saturate it with water, and you take 4 mil plastic and you peg it over top of it, and you basically are creating an oven to burn, to bake away all that vegetation. The downside to that is it takes a while. You want to start it in the beginning of the summer, and you're going to have that be there the whole time, the whole summer into the fall. Okay, it takes a long time. The other downside to solarization is you will inevitably bake away nutrients in the soil because of how hot it gets underneath there. So you're going to be baking away from nutrients, natural occurring nutrients that's in your top layer of soil. So whenever I have anybody solarizing, I always tell them they're going to want to probably put a layer of topsoil down once that top layer of vegetation has been baked away, and they scrape it off. They're going to want to replace a little bit of topsoil to get the nutrients back in there.
So we just happen to have a rather large piece of property that we are going to start from scratch. And our son has just cleared, I mean, with equipment, taken all the top layer off and then put down topsoil. So we're starting fresh.
Okay.
But now we're also approaching midsummer. Can we begin to plant things now, or are we going to have to wait till the fall, or?
You can plant things now. You're probably not going to get as many blooms, but if you plant a perennial mix with an annual mix, a hardy annual mix, like lots of black-eyed Susan, lots of coneflower, a lot of your heavy hitters that you know are going to grow, you will definitely get black-eyed Susan blooms. I'll guarantee those, because they
Yeah,
bloom.
I know.
When don't they bloom?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking of a plot of land. We have let's say it's a little under a half a mile long and 50 feet wide. And it's all grass now. That could all be,
Right.
it's not dedicated for anything. It could be used for that.
Yeah, so if you want to do your the quickest prep possible, you get some machinery and you rip that top layer of sod off to bare earth. And we're only talking the top layer, and
Right.
Right.
grass roots are not grass roots are only about this long.
Right.
They grow like a carpet. It's like a carpet of roots. So
Right.
you're just ripping that off of there. Sure, go ahead and seed it with a perennial wildflower mix, and seed it with annuals, and you'll get growth. You will get growth. But you're probably not going to get as many blooms this year, if any. You will establish plants and root systems, which is great. And then next year is when you'll see your blooms.
Okay,
Okay,
And the problem, people have problems with that because they want it, a lot of people want like blooms right now. Why? It doesn't
Right.
look pretty. It just looks weedy. It just looks like this. Like, well, and that's why we start things early in the spring so we can get those blooms. But if we start late in the summer, the other thing you have to think about is if you're starting now, you're going to need to water it. So there's
Yeah.
a watering plan that needs to be in place.
right, that would be the water
if we
source.
waited until autumn to take the top grass off and then seed it, would that work? Or are we better off on that particular property waiting until next spring?
I'd say if you're gonna want to do what we call a frost seeding, do you know what that is?
No,
Okay, a frost seeding is where we wait until we have bare earth. Okay, bare earth, prepared bare earth, and in the beginning of March-ish, in Ohio, we start to get some of our last snowfalls. And we're gonna watch the weather. You're gonna become real weather geeks. You're gonna everything's about the weather when it comes to restoration projects. And you're gonna wait for like about a 2-3 inch snow when they're calling for a snowfall, about 2-3 inches in March. And you're gonna go out there with your seed on that bare soil plot, and you're gonna broadcast all that seed on top of the snow.
Uh-huh.
And what that's gonna do is gonna do multiple things. Wildflower seed loves to have that vernalization and stratification from the cold and the snow, that roughen it up. Wildflower seed doesn't need to be buried. It needs only 1/4 of an inch of the top of the soil. And so if you try and dig it up and bury it, you'll almost always bury it too deep and it won't germinate. The snow, what it'll do is when the sun comes out and melts that snow, it'll suck the seed right down into that layer of soil where you want it to be. So it'll plant it for you.
Mhm.
And it'll also keep the birds away.
perfect.
Okay. Now, do you provide like a layout of information of what seeds to use, where to get them, what to do, or is this something we have to refer to Ray for the expertise on this?
Sure, I can recommend seed mix.
And where we purchase this and all that type of stuff?
Okay, so I'll explain a little bit about me. I'm not a purist. I don't believe in pure seed being used because if I look around me, why am I worried about that? Look around. There's nothing really anymore, okay? Unless I'm dealing with a special area like oak openings in Northwest Ohio, or a fen or a bog or a pebble bog or anything like that, where I know I need to have very specialized plants. I'm getting my seed from Pheasants Forever, where the plants were germinated and the seed was captured in Western United States. Why do I care if purple coneflower came from Idaho? I don't care. I don't care. I want affordable purple coneflower. I want affordable wild bergamot because every penny I can spend on more seed is what matters to me, unless I'm in a specialized area. And I'm not in a specialized area, so I'm going to get as much seed as I can, and Pheasants Forever has the best price I can get.
Okay.
Okay,
I've been talking also to Carter Historic Farm, which is in Wood County. It's Wood County Park System, and they're recreating a farm there, Bowling Green. And they've got two fairly large areas that are gardens, which aren't really being used very much. I talked with them a bit. So, I mean, if I talked with, how should I say this? Could I look at your website and just give them more information on this project and how they might use, they would want to use seeds that would have been around here in this area in the Depression. That's their basic thing.
Sure. That's okay. There's a lot of people who feel that way. I have almost all of my projects in Metro Park. They're pretty heck bent on local genome seeds from Northeastern Ohio. And I'm like, and that's fine. It just costs more money and it takes more time.
Okay. I mean, I was thinking of giving them just a little briefing on this project and how it might work for them.
Sure.
I guess your website would have some
I mean, our website is constantly under construction because there's really just 1.5 people working on this at a state level.
Okay. Maybe I could email you a few questions or, okay,
That would probably be better.
thanks.
Yeah, and you know, if they've got greenhouses and things like that, and they want to grow their own seed, their own plants, I mean, you know, what we do is, so we have our milkweed pod collection. We go around, we collect milkweed pods from around the state. It's Ohio common milkweed. Is it Ohio common milkweed? Well, we picked it from Ohio, so technically it is. Did it come from Ohio? Maybe. More than likely, you know, so it's like if they're harvesting their own seed where they're at and they want to grow their own plants and then continue to harvest seed from those plants that they grow and so on and so forth, then they can start doing that themselves. It just takes a lot more time and a lot more expensive. And honestly, you know, when I get involved in projects, I'm almost always dealing with 9 times out of 10, how much money am I going to spend? How much time is it going to take? And the answers I need to come up with is how cheap can it be and how little time and maintenance can I give you? I mean, because, you know, that's kind of unfortunately and fortunately, I guess, is the name of the game of these days. How expensive and how long, you know? So we try and get it down to not a cookie cutter, because none of these are going to be cookie cutters. There's going to be a little bit of a different prescription per area that you choose. Okay, unless they're almost all identical, then you would probably have the same prescription. But let's say there's trees, or let's say there's, you know, a stream, or let's say there's a wetland, or the seed prescription would change if it's a wet area as opposed to an upland area. So they're not always the same. You know, so we have to get good at getting to the meat of the meal so we can get things moving forward, you know? So that's usually where I'm coming from, is how cost effective and how quickly can we put it in place?
Okay.
Now, if you wanted to go ahead and scalp, I call it scalping, what you're describing, removing that top layer of vegetation. If you're going to scalp that this year, I would wait until probably just before we start getting to temperatures where the ground's going to freeze, so where you can't do it anymore, to a temperature where once you scalp that, things are not going to regrow. Okay, so that way you can keep it maintained with no growth and just bare earth. You're going to want to put some lath out there. You know, lath is some, you know, stakes, to stake the corners, the stake along the edge, so you know you can see where it's at, because when you have snow cover, you may not be able to see it anymore.
Yeah, okay.
You're going to stake the edges so you know where that is. Do it late in the fall before the ground freezes so you don't get regrowth. Again, here's where you're going to become a weather nerd, right? You're going to watch that temperature and say, oh, it looks like it's going to, you know, by November 1st, it looks like it's going to start getting below freezing. So we need to get out there and scalp this area before November the 1st, probably the week before. So that way it stays below freezing. So you keep growth away, things you don't want to grow there. You want bare earth. And then you're going to move in the winter. And theoretically, we're going to have even colder temperatures, and you're going to still have bare earth because you scalped it in a time when vegetation won't grow. And then you're going to wait for it to snow in March. And then you're going to go out there and broadcast seed within those stakes, those areas that you staked. Broadcast seed.
Yep.
Okay.
So you can do that this year. You could do it in the fall for winter seeding for 2023.
Yep. That'd be great. Okay.
So most
That
people
sounds
don't
like
have-
it's really cost effective.
What's that?
That sounds very cost effective.
Well,
Do it
you
that
guys
way.
have the equipment, so yes, but sometimes people don't have the equipment. So
Right.
then
Right.
you're renting something, you know? Or we're doing like 15 acres where there's absolutely no way we're scalping any of that. This is going to be a chemical spray prep for 15 acres on the back of an ATV. And we're going to do it 4 times for a frost seeding that following year.
Okay.
So everything, see how the prescription can start to change depending on how many acres.
Right.
No, right.
That's when you get your local soybean farmer to come over with his equipment that he uses in his fields and
Potentially, usually for 15 acres, you start to get concerned about too much, what's the word I'm looking for? Too much movement of soil and not being able to, and releasing a Pandora's box of things we don't want to see. And so we don't want to do any kind of tillage at that point. If we've got 15 acres, I don't want to go in and start moving. I might be unleashing Johnson grass. I might be unleashing teasel. I might be unleashing a bunch of stuff I don't want. So if I do a chemical prep on the top, I'm keeping the soil bed intact and removing what's on the top, getting it down to bare soil that way. So that way I'm protecting myself from potential invasive species in my seeding.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
So that's why there's all these different tools.
Okay.
It's a little exhausting sometimes to think about it.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Question, Ray?
Well, yeah, I've been mulling over a project here in Amherst. There's a little underused park right in the middle of town. It's about 5 acres. It's along Beaver Creek. It used to be developed. There used to be a plumbing company there, so I guess it would qualify as a brownfield.
Okay.
But it is lawn, and almost nothing is being done with it. Some people go down there and walk dogs. That's
Is
about it.
Is there nothing being done? So there's some questions that come up when you say it's technically a brownfield and it's just lawn and nothing's being done with it. Is it not being used on purpose because it's a capped brownfield?
Well, it was donated by a local business person to the city, and now the city mows it. And
But-
it's got a designation as a memorial park.
Right, but if you look into the EPA records on that parcel and see if there was some sort of covenant put together that said that this can't be used for anything else, and that the reason that it's not being used for anything else, it's just grass, there could be some sort of paperwork somewhere. If it's truly a brownfield, there could be some sort of covenant on that that says you can't use this for anything else. It has to be maintained like this. Similarly,
Good point.
ODOT has spots where we're not allowed to do stuff. It can only be a parking lot, or it can only be grass, or it can only be, we can't dig, we can't do building or anything like that there because there's a covenant that says we're not allowed to.
Right. I think that there were buildings that were demolished and then they put a couple inches of topsoil over top.
Okay,
I tried to put a shovel in and, just below the turf line, it's hard.
we'll double check and make sure that there isn't a cap in there. There isn't some sort of cap for contaminants.
Yeah, all right, worth checking.
Well, no, I mean, seriously, because because if it's truly is a brownfield, there's a whole nother set of vegetation that you would choose from for planting there that has a shallower root system,
Okay.
because you don't want to use something like cup plant. You don't want to use anything like prairie dock or anything like that, because those root systems are super long, super thick. And if it's a capped brownfield, then you're going to break that cap.
Yeah, it has a certain appeal because there's like parking there, but there's almost never any cars in it. So it is publicly accessible. It's a short walk from downtown, like half a block.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of water hydrants. So anything that was planted could easily be watered. You don't have to go take buckets out of the creek.
Okay. Right.
So there's that kind of maintenance asset there.
Yeah,
And
he
it
did
may
it
be in part of a grander scheme where the county metro parks, which has a park just a half a mile up the creek, maybe thinking of extending their park, connecting this memorial park and making it a longer piece of county park along that creek. So there may be some bigger schemes afoot.
Is the Memorial Park a city park?
Yes,
So that would be, so you're getting into some discussions that can be difficult to have between city and county municipalities, and because those are separate entities, and getting them to agree to something like that might be difficult.
well, there's already, Beaver Creek Park is now owned by the city, managed by the county park.
Okay.
So there's already that partnership in place.
Okay, perfect. That's even better. I was gonna say, because if there's no partnership, that's all, we're talking 5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah,
A whole other kettle of worms.
yeah,
Yeah, which we've done, we've assisted with, that's, all in our wheelhouse, is just, putting that, time frame together of, okay, first we've got to have these discussions, but if that partnership's already in place, and especially if you're turning it into something they don't really need to maintain anymore, that might be very attractive to the city, who probably has less money than the county.
right. And I think as far as management goes, anything beyond mowing is outside of their skill set.
Well, if you can take the mowing away, then you're saving them fuel, you're saving them expenses.
Oh, I'm sure it's a pain in the butt to get a
Yeah.
tractor over there,
Sure,
to get a mower.
that's your selling point right there.
That's the selling point with Tyler too.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Saving them money, you're saving them, by doing this, we're gonna spend a little bit of money, but we're gonna save more money in the long run, because you don't have to mobilize an employee, you don't have to mobilize equipment, you don't have to spend fuel, which is almost $5 a gallon, So those are all very attractive to a city budget,
sure.
Mhm.
which is where I have to think, where I have to figure out who my audience is and who I'm selling to, and have to come up with, that's where I come out of the gate. I don't talk about the great thing about butterflies and pollination. I come out saving money, saving equipment, and then I talk about the butterflies,
Right.
because they don't care about the butterflies.
Okay, well, those are all real good thoughts. I appreciate your feedback on that. And now that we've opened up the channel of communication, I think there's going to be a lot more questions
Sure.
flowing. And I appreciate the experience that you have for those of us who are striking out to do new things.
Yeah, it's always, you got to pay it forward. So I'll help you guys, and then you guys share our mission and do your stuff. And that way, that's how we make it a two-way street,
Right. Yep.
Very good.
And I'm much better with texting, honestly. The reason I emailed you back so fast, Ray, is because I was anticipating your email. But I'm buried in emails. So if you text me questions, I'll answer you much, much faster.
Okay.
All right.
And you got her contact info,
I did,
Ray?
I did.
Okay, all right.
Be prepared.
You be prepared. Most of the time when people text me with questions, I text them back 3 additional questions.
Okay, sounds good. All right,
Great. Any other questions?
that's good.
That's good.
All
Fantastic.
right,
Yeah.
Marcy, that's
Great
thank you for
information,
joining us.
Marcy.
Of course, yeah, I'm happy to help. Just feel free to, you can email me, and I might not get back to you. If you email me and you don't hear from me, then text me. It's like, hey, it's me. I'm like, oh, yes, I know, I'm sorry.
Okay,
Okay.
So, but I'm happy to help. Just let me know what you need.
Okay.
very good.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for your time.
Thank you.
Of course. Have a great afternoon.
You too.
Take care,
Bye-bye.
guys. Bye.